Hi, this is Communities Army of Ukraine podcast. My name is Dmytro Vasilenko, and today we will be speaking with Mr. John Sullivan. He is American who used to work on Wall Street, and now he gives a unique viewpoint and first-hand experience about the culture, history, and current events in Ukraine and about Russian invasion. John says about himself, "The greatest compliment I receive is when Ukrainians begin to call me the Irish American with the Ukrainian heart and soul." So, welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please tell briefly about yourself.
It's strange. When I was on Wall Street, one of my big sayings was a Winston Churchill saying, which is amazing, was Zelensky acting like Churchill today, was a saying that we make a living by what we get, we make a life by what we give. And too many of us focus on what we get in life. When we become successful or not successful, we need to know that we need to help other people. The Ukrainian culture intrigued me from when I first started coming here in 2012. And the more I found, the more it fit who I am. It's a culture of independence, of independence, individual freedom. There was a great story told me almost the first time I was here. And it said, if you take 3 Ukrainians and put them in a room, they will form 4 different political parties. But if you attack them, they become one. And that's what we're seeing today. And it's something I admire greatly.
John, you have spent a lot of time in Ukraine. Could you tell me, what did you understand about Ukraine back then, before the full-scale invasion, that many Americans don't get today?
I think we have to go back before that. We have to go back that most of the West did not understand Ukraine at all. If you had asked me in 2012, before I ever came to Ukraine, where Chernobyl was, I would say Russia. Most people would. So we really did not understand Ukraine and its culture. From 2014, I've been coming since then. As we know, there's been a war going on since 2014, which a lot of the world does not recognize, that almost 15,000 people died in eastern Ukraine. And the war was ongoing. I will say in Kyiv, when I would visit, you really wouldn't know it. It was very strange. As we saw the full-scale happen in 2022, and I was here in January of 2022, when we saw it happen, it dawned on everybody what people in the Donbas region and Crimea have been dealing with. And I think what people have to understand is that these two countries are not the same. They've never been the same. The Ukrainian culture is really based on, as I said, individual freedom. It's based on families. When we talk about Ukraine as a country, it's not really the country. It's the culture of Ukraine. The Ukrainian culture is what is important. And that is very different than Russia, which is really a collectivist society that traces back to the Golden Horde of Buta Khan. They still act the same way. So the life in Russia is not as important. In Ukraine, every single life, whether a human life or an animal life, is very, very important.
You have been very vocal and even provocative in your stance against Russia. Why do you think strong emotional actions matter in shaping public opinion in the US?
Especially what happens now in social media. You're getting snippets. You're getting minute-and-a-half videos. You're not getting long explanations. A lot of these issues we're dealing with take long explanations. So you almost have to be, as I would say, almost outrageous in what you do to get that splash. I had a friend of mine who has actually done a lot of Instagram stuff, which I have not done until recently. What happens is in the first 5 to 10 seconds, you have to do something that catches their attention, or else they don't look. So in the first 5 to 10 seconds, we have to do something. They see it, and then you can go into something else. So the calling of Putin as a maniacal midget, or of calling Donald Trump a dobayab, it's pretty outrageous, okay? But it gets attention. And if you get attention, then maybe you can get through to somebody. And I think that's one of the keys. One of the weaknesses of the Ukrainian culture, in my opinion, is you guys are some of the most polite people in the world. Even in business, if there's a problem, it's tough for someone who's working for you to come to you with a problem. In the US, we're very straightforward, sometimes too straightforward. And I think in the US, we have to realize what we're fighting. We're fighting this instinct of quick snippets. not long information, but quick things. And you have to make a splash and get their attention. And once you do, then you can make your statement.
Got it. John, in your view, what are the biggest gaps in the current sanctions regime against Russia, and what should the US and its allies do in order to fix it?
One of the problems we're having is the current administration is a wild card. Nobody really knows what they're going to do. They recently allowed Russian oil to be sold again, which is insane. What we have to do is understand who Russians are. We have to understand that Russia uses a lot of people in the public as propaganda. We notice a person like, I can give a direct story that I know about of Gergiev, who's one of the top conductors in the world, was asked why he has not come out against the full-scale invasion by a friend of his, who's a friend of mine. The response from Gergiev was, who's of course sponsored by Putin, I can't, because if I do, I have 300 people in the orchestra that would lose their jobs. We would no longer get funding. And my response back was, you have tens of thousands of Ukrainians die because of that. They're a lot more important than your 300 orchestra members. So what we have to do is understand who Russians are. What do I think should happen? Truthfully, I think every Russian visa should be yanked. Send them back to their country they love, because they don't. That's why they're not there.
John, actually, Russia continues to use culture, sports, public figures, as you have just mentioned, as the tools of the influence. How serious is this threat in the United States, and how should it be countered?
The Ukrainian Association of Florida did a great job recently. We had a famous violinist that was from Russia who wanted to perform. We protested against it. We got it yanked.
Mr. Repin, yeah.
Yeah. One of the issues that we're having is Ovechkin, who is a hockey player from Russia, is the leading goal scorer in NHL history. They use him every single day for Russian propaganda. We saw in the Olympics this year, Russians did not compete. However, the Russians took almost anyone who had Russian heritage and said, see, they're Russian. We saw it in the Paralympics, which Ukraine came in third place in the medal count. Russia was way down. They try to use everything they can to show the greatness of that country, which, again, in my opinion, has never been a great country. They stole the history of Ukraine. They essentially have the history of the Golden Horde of Buta Khan. This is what they have to do. They have to steal others' history. They have to steal others' stories. And we have to counter that. Because when you see a famous Russian who comes out and is proud of Russia, Putin pats them on the back, not only with pats on the back, but money. A quick story, a very good friend of mine is in karate, one of the top karate people in the world. And he had a friend of his who was Russian. They had not talked. About 2 years ago, they were at an event, and the guy comes up behind him and gives him a big hug and says, oh, good to see you again. And he turned around and looked at him and said, get away from me. Because he knew what was happening. That Russian was there to show the greatness of Russia. They need to be isolated until they stand up against the regime. If they're not going to, they need to just be isolated. And this goes back with me many, many decades.
John, as an American who actually understands both American and Ukrainian mindset, to your opinion, what is the most effective way to explain this war to Americans who are still indifferent or confused?
The first thing we have to do is allow people to understand that Kiev Rus has nothing to do with Russia. The word Russia was stolen, essentially is Greek for Rus. They stole the history. So when you understand that Russia had to steal Ukraine's history, you start to look at words like Lviv versus Kiev. It was Kiev because the Russians didn't have the right alphabet. So it's not a minor detail. We have to differentiate between the two cultures. One of the things we see on the battlefield is the Ukrainian soldiers, if they see a stray cat or stray dog, adopt it. The Russians shoot it. That's the difference in the two cultures. It's one of being connected to nature, being connected to who you are, knowing that every single life, no matter what it is extremely valuable. In Russia, we see what they do when they fight. They did this in World War II. They just sent thousands of people to get killed. Ukrainians respect life.
Absolutely. John, how do you see the future of the U.S. support for Ukraine across the party lines?
The U.S. people right now, it runs about 65 to 70% support Ukraine. Okay, one of the problems we have is Mr. Trump, who lives not far from me in the U.S., he really has little to no understanding of Ukraine at all. We talk about Biden, who I don't like what he did either. I think he did as little as possible. But at least Biden came here. He wasn't cowardly enough to stay in the U.S. and talk about things. J.D. Vance, our vice president, has never been here. So until we can get through this time frame, which will happen probably in this next election where Trump is muted a little bit, it's tough. NATO has done a great job in cutting this deal to allow NATO countries to buy U.S. weapons. It's really about all we're good for right now. So as long as we keep the weapon flow going, that's a positive. There was a great statement that came out during this Iranian situation. In a period of 10 days, the United States and Israel had used 800 Patriot missiles. It was 200 more than Ukraine used in 4 years. It was insane. They were using $4 million missiles to shoot down $50,000 drones. The Ukrainians adapted to that. They actually have other weapons now that are fantastic that are able to shoot down these drones. The American people have to know how careful Ukraine has been with the money and with the weapons. Ukraine does not get money, does not go down to Walmart and buy tanks. We gave them tanks. We have 4,000 stored in California. I think we gave them 120. We gave them no F-15 or F-16s at all. None. Why? Why are we doing so little? So Americans have to understand, yes, a lot has been done, but the numbers aren't what they believe it is. And I hate to take more time on this, but it's very important. Trump has quoted a number of $350 billion. There is nowhere in the world that you can find any verification of anything close to that. It's an outright lie. The number is closer to 200 billion. It's actually 188. Of that 200 billion in appropriations, because Congress has to appropriate the money, less than half of that came to Ukraine. Because what was happening was you appropriate the money, and when we were giving Ukraine a HIMARS system, we would build a new one. Well, part of the appropriations has to be the building of that new one. So instead of $1 million, it's $2 million. So the total numbers are incorrect. Instead of 350, it's more like 80, between 88 and 90. It's a big difference. And when people know that, they kind of step back and go, oh, and it makes them think a little bit more. The same thing, you have a shirt on about NATO. There's a great story I have about NATO on it. I hate to wander on this. People talk about all the money that the U.S. has supported NATO this entire time frame, that the U.S. for years, if it wasn't for the U.S., NATO wouldn't exist. Here's reality. The country that pays the most to support NATO in the operations of NATO, NATO as an organization, is Germany. The United States is number 2 with Germany, both at 16%. That's set to run NATO itself. The 2 and the 5% numbers that are always shown those are the numbers that a country needs to spend for its own defense. That money does not go to NATO. So these numbers that are being thrown around are totally incorrect. The U.S. may spend $1 trillion on its own defense, but that doesn't go to NATO unless the U.S. wants to put a base somewhere. And that's another thing that is a huge misunderstanding of people. And I think it's caused Ukraine a lot of problems.
Yeah, unfortunately. John, could you please tell us a little bit more about your initiative aimed at supporting Ukrainian kids, aimed at their psychological rehabilitation?
One of the problems and again, I was telling you beforehand, when I first came here in 2012, I noticed little kids didn't have dreams. They didn't have sparkles in their eyes, and their parents didn't have a positive outlook for them. After 2014, those dreams were coming around. And I also always go to a statue in Kyiv, that's the Holodomor statue, and it's a haunting statue of a little girl. I was here in January of 2022, came back in early April of 2022 and went down there. And I always remember looking at the statue. It was pitch black out. And I had this weird thing happen. And as I was looking at her, I could hear her say, why are they doing this to us again? Because Ukrainian children have been through this so many times from the Russians. And I made a promise to a statue that I would do whatever I could to help save this generation of Ukrainian children. The way we can do it is deal with the psychological trauma that they're dealing with. There are flaws in dealing with children in psychological trauma that has always existed. And that is, we don't have enough psychologists, and less than 20% of the kids ever get help. The psychologist will tell you that even mild trauma will cause long-term ramifications. One of my partner's good friends is a very famous woman who was born in Hungary. She's 91 or 92 years old. She still has nightmares of air raid sirens. So if we don't address it in some way, or don't teach the children how to address it, it will have these long-term ramifications that we'll see. So we needed to come up with a way to do it, and that's what we've done. We're in the process of designing it. It is totally being delivered in an electronic manner. It is allowing children to learn how to deal with it without ignoring it. It's one of my friends who died a year ago was one of the top people in how children learn in the world. And I took a lot of his ideas and applied it to that. And it's essentially, how do kids learn? What's the reality? Kids learn by playing. They do not learn by being lectured. So we let them play, and they learn by doing that.
John, my last question. What will be your message to your fellow Americans in terms of Ukraine?
Gosh, it's tougher than... Let's take it from two standpoints. To my fellow Americans that have been supporting Ukraine, learn about the country, learn about the history that you're supporting, because the more you know, the more you're going to want to support. This is not over. I've been coming this entire full-scale invasion. The last time was for 6 months. I was living with 1 hour of electricity a day. People around the world don't know that. People around the world right now don't know what's happening in Ukraine. We get hit by ballistic missiles every day. You get 1 or 2 goes in the Middle East and it gets worldwide news. So make sure we keep Ukraine on the front page. Don't be afraid to stand up against the ignorance that's out there. Now, to my fellow Americans on the other side, keep in mind, Russians are very good at one thing, and that's lying. The disinformation that we've been hit by for decades is massive. Nikita Khrushchev said in the late 1950s, 1960s, we will destroy you from within without firing a single shot. That's what's happening. The country's become divided. So when you think something negative about Ukraine, actually check the information, see if it's valid. Does Zelensky own a home in Miami? No. It's been proven he doesn't, but it spreads like wildfire. So before you spread anything, check it. Make sure that you're spreading information that's true. Because if you do, what you will find is a lot of this stuff is a lie. The opposite side of the people that support Ukraine. The statement is Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. Okay? Before 2014, Ukraine was substantially more corrupt. After 2014, Ukraine has increased more than any other country in the world, almost, there's a couple small countries, in its fight against corruption. It is now substantially less corrupt than Russia. They were almost tied with Russia in 2014. They're trying to address things, to fix things. They have a thing called Prozora, which is a bid platform that is totally transparent afterwards. If you work within the Ukrainian government, you have to divulge every asset you have, and don't dare try to hide it, because people get nailed every day if they try to. Understand Ukraine is fighting corruption. Most countries don't. So I would say it's probably one of the biggest things I admire about the country right now is this fight against corruption. It will no longer be accepted.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for your support to Ukraine. Thank you for everything that you do.
Будь ласка. Thank you for letting me.